We are told to be kind, to be good, to speak the truth and expect the same. But what happens when goodness is punished, honesty is exploited, and sincerity becomes a liability? You begin to realize that survival in this world requires more than virtue. It requires strategy. In 1513, an outcast diplomat in Florence, Italy, called Niccolò Machiavelli, wrote something so infamous that it still echoes through boardrooms, battlegrounds, and bedrooms to this day. His most famous book, The Prince, was not a manifesto for tyrants. It was a coded survival guide for those trapped in systems run by liars and lions. Machiavelli didn't create the game. He simply revealed its rules. Yet his name has become a slur. Machiavellian is now synonymous with manipulation, deceit, and cruelty. But the truth is far stranger and more useful. What Machiavelli offered was clarity in a world of illusion. A dark mirror held up to human nature, exposing the gap between how we pretend people are and how they really behave when power is on the table. In today's world, where perception is currency, algorithms reward narcissism, and institutions mask their cruelty in soft language, the lessons of the Prince are more vital than ever. But this isn't about politics. This is about you, your choices, your self-mastery, your ability to navigate a world that rewards charm over truth, dominance over honesty, performance over principle. In this episode, we will reclaim Machiavelli from the shadows. We'll explore how his principles, appearance versus reality, fortune versus will, perception as power, can be reframed not for rulers of states, but rulers of the self. Because in a time when everyone plays a part, perhaps the greatest power is knowing the script. The mind is a labyrinth. Let's walk its shadows together. He's been called a monster, a moral nihilist, the devil's scribe. But Niccolò Machiavelli was none of those things. He was, above all, a realist. And realists often become the villains in stories told by idealists. Born in Renaissance Florence, Machiavelli lived in a time of backstabbing politics, shifting alliances, and brutal power games. He was not imagining a cruel world. He was surviving one. When he wrote The Prince, he was neither a ruler nor an advisor to kings. He was a man exiled from power, watching from the margins. What he offered was not an instruction manual for evil, but a confession of how the world truly works when no one is pretending to be good. And yet, centuries of distortion have buried his message under layers of misunderstanding. The word Machiavellian has become a shorthand for manipulation, for cunning without conscience. But read his work carefully, and something else emerges: a desperate pragmatism, a brutal honesty about human nature and the systems we build around it. He wrote that people are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, and greedy. Not because he hated them, but because he had observed them, over and over again, in courts, in war, in friendship. What disturbed Machiavelli was not the darkness in men's hearts, it was society's refusal to see it clearly. Modern culture teaches you to aim for ideals, to believe that good always triumphs, that kindness returns kindness, that transparency breeds trust. But what happens when it doesn't? When kindness is seen as weakness? When transparency becomes ammunition for others to use against you? This is where Machiavelli steps in, not to corrupt you, but to wake you up. He was not advocating cruelty for its own sake. He was warning you that systems built on appearances can only be navigated by those who see through the mask. That in order to preserve what is good in yourself, you may need to understand the language of those who would destroy it. Machiavelli's genius lies in his unflinching refusal to flatter humanity. He doesn't sugarcoat, he doesn't romanticize. Instead, he strips away the illusion that power is distributed according to merit. He exposes the hard truth that those who play the game with eyes open fare better than those who refuse to acknowledge it exists. In this way, the prince becomes less a handbook for rulers and more a map of the terrain we all walk through, whether in corporate boardrooms, family politics, social networks, or intimate relationships. Wherever power flows, Machiavelli's insights apply. And here's the paradox. By confronting the world's darkness, he offers you the tools to remain whole within it. He teaches you how to see clearly without becoming cruel, how to navigate without becoming numb, how to move with awareness instead of being moved by others. It is not an invitation to manipulation, it is a shield against it. Think of the world you live in now. Look past the surface: influencer culture, political theater, performative virtue. Look at the algorithms that reward spectacle over sincerity. Look at the people promoted not because of their wisdom, but because of their ability to appear knowledgeable. Is this a world that rewards honesty, or is it one that consumes it? Machiavelli never said, "The ends justify the means." That was a misquote, a simplification of a mind much sharper than that. What he said, again and again, is that outcomes matter. That intention is not enough. That a virtuous act, done without strategy, may lead to ruin, and that ruin helps no one. In the 21st century, these insights are not just relevant, they are essential. We are surrounded by systems that reward illusion. And yet, we cling to moral absolutes as if the world operates like a fairy tale. It does not. And Machiavelli knew that pretending otherwise makes you easy to crush. So what does clarity look like now? It looks like questioning who benefits from every narrative. It looks like protecting your truth while understanding how others spin theirs. It looks like accepting that the world is not fair and deciding to move through it anyway, eyes wide open. Machiavelli's reputation may remain stained by centuries of misreading. But if you strip away the fear, the slander, the ideological smears, what remains is a voice whispering to anyone who feels outmatched by the cruelty of the world. You are not wrong to see the game. You are not evil for learning how to play it. And you are not weak for wanting to win it without losing your soul. This is the beginning of reclaiming your agency. Not through force, but through vision. Because in a corrupt world, clarity is the first act of rebellion. If you're liking this video, please like and subscribe now. It helps the channel to grow. Thanks for your support. Machiavelli understood something most people still refuse to admit. The world doesn't run on truth. It runs on appearance. The great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances, he wrote, as though they were realities. This is not a cynical observation. It's a strategic warning. Because in every arena of life, personal, professional, political, those who learn to shape perception wield invisible power. In Machiavelli's world, kings could be overthrown not by armies, but by whispers. Reputation was a form of warfare. Image was ammunition. Appearances didn't just reflect power, they created it. Today, little has changed, but the scale has shifted. In the 21st century, you don't need a crown to show authority. A camera and confidence will do. Social media has turned every user into a micro-prince, curating a kingdom of followers, likes, and influence. In this new court, perception isn't just manipulated, it's monetized. But here's the hidden danger. When everyone is performing, sincerity becomes suspect. In a world where people wear masks, the one who doesn't is either seen as naive or as a threat. So what do? You learn how the masks are made. Machiavelli never said to lie needlessly. He said to understand what others need to see and to show it strategically. It's not about abandoning your truth. It's about protecting it behind a well-crafted facade, a persona, not a prison. Let's bring this closer to home. Think of your own life. job interviews, first dates, social gatherings. How often do you tailor your presentation? How often do you speak not from your core, but from what is expected? This isn't weakness, it's survival. And Machiavelli understood that adaptation is not deceit, it's evolution under pressure. In a hostile system, transparency is a risk. Being fully known can mean being easily targeted. Machiavelli would argue that mystery, or controlled opacity, is a form of strength, not because it deceives, but because it deflects manipulation. We live in a society supposedly obsessed with authenticity, but most of what passes for it is just another curated performance. The raw, the real, the unfiltered. These are often just more sophisticated illusions designed to appear honest while steering perception. And yet, we shame those who craft their image deliberately. We call it fake, dishonest. But Machiavelli would ask, is it more dishonest to wear a mask or to pretend masks don't exist? Understanding perception gives you leverage. In conflict, it allows you to appear weaker than you are, or stronger if the moment demands. In negotiation, it lets you project confidence before you feel it. In leadership, it builds loyalty not just through action, but through symbolic presence. Symbols matter. Visuals matter. Tone, body language, timing, they all sculpt how others interpret you. This is not manipulation in the malicious sense. It's strategy in the ancient sense, the art of surviving among unpredictable minds. And here lies the paradox. To be perceived as authentic, you may need to become more deliberate. To protect your truth, you may need to perform. Not to deceive, but to shield the parts of you that are not yet ready to be seen. Machiavelli knew that visibility could be dangerous. The more they know about you, the more they can use against you. This was true in Renaissance Italy. It is even more true in an age where your data, your image, and your narrative are constantly being harvested, processed, and judged. But this isn't about fear. It's about awareness. Ask yourself, who controls how you are seen? Who decides your narrative? Your enemies, your employer, an algorithm? What if you reclaimed that authorship? This is the heart of modern Machiavellianism, not deception, but deliberate presence. You don't need to lie, but you do need to shape, to craft, to shield. Because unchecked sincerity is not always brave. It can be suicidal in a predatory system. Machiavelli teaches us not how to dominate others, but how not to be dominated by illusions. He reminds you that power often begins with the eye, not with the sword. That perception is not just surface, it is substance. And this isn't a call to become inauthentic. It's an invitation to become conscious, to master your reflection before the world defines it for you, to wear the mask before they paint one on you, to realize that sometimes the only way to remain honest is to appear strategic. Because in a world where image creates influence, the one who shapes their image with care does not just survive, they rule. Half of what shapes your life, Machiavelli said, is Fortuna. Fortune, chance, the unpredictable current of the world. The other half is Virtù, your own force, your will, your capacity to act with intelligence and boldness in the face of that chaos. Most people live at the mercy of one or the other. They either surrender to fate, blaming every failure on luck, or they cling to the illusion of total control, believing that success is simply the result of effort. Machiavelli knew better. He saw life as a violent river, sometimes gentle, sometimes devastating, and survival as the art of adapting your strength to the terrain. In the 21st century, Fortuna has multiplied, chaos has evolved. It's no longer just war, weather, or the whims of kings. It's market crashes, viral trends, artificial intelligence, political upheaval, pandemics, and information overload. A single algorithm shift can collapse an empire built on likes. A single narrative turn can exile a public figure overnight. In such a world, force alone is not enough. Intelligence alone is not enough. It is virtù, the ability to respond to instability with clarity and calculated courage, that becomes the cornerstone of modern survival. But virtù is not virtue in the moral sense. It is not about being good. It is about being effective, about using your strength wisely, not sentimentally. Machiavelli praised those who knew when to be bold, when to be ruthless, when to bend the rules to prevent greater ruin. He admired those who were not frozen by indecision or blinded by ideals. There is a quiet kind of power in accepting that you do not control everything. Because once you accept that chaos is real, you stop wasting energy resisting it and start learning how to move with it. This is not submission. It is strategic surrender. The difference is enormous. Inaction is not the opposite of action. Panic is. And Machiavelli's idea of virtù means not panicking when the river overflows, but adjusting your course, building stronger dams, anticipating the flood. In your own life, consider how often you've clung to certainty, expecting relationships, careers, or systems to obey some hidden script, and when they didn't, you collapsed. Not because of the event itself, but because of your refusal to believe that unpredictability is the rule, not the exception. This is the wisdom Machiavelli gives us, that chaos is not an error in the system. It is the system. And the most powerful people in any era are not the ones who resist this truth, but those who rehearse for it. Fortune favors the bold, not because boldness guarantees success, but because boldness is the only rational response when you don't control the outcome. Caution becomes a liability in environments governed by chaos. When the ground beneath you shifts, it is not the most moral who survive. It is the most adaptive. And Machiavelli believed that courage, properly channeled, was more protective than any prayer for stability. But boldness must be matched by timing, strategy, restraint. Otherwise, it becomes recklessness. Virtù means knowing when to strike and when to wait, when to pivot and when to endure, when to speak, and when silence itself becomes the sharpest move on the board. We're not taught this kind of thinking. We're told to trust the process, to manifest our desires. But Machiavelli would laugh at such prescriptions. He would say, "The process doesn't care about you. The river will flood. The dice will fall where they may. Your job is not to hope for perfect outcomes, but to sharpen your will until you can swim with the flood and not drown." Modern life is a cascade of uncertainties, and most people either shut down or lash out. But you, if you understand Fortuna and Virtù, can take a third path, the path of lucid defiance. Not blind optimism, not paralyzing fear, but readiness. This readiness doesn't mean you always win. It means you're never entirely at the mercy of the storm. It means when the system fails, you improvise. When the ladder collapses, you build a bridge. When the world burns, you don't wait for rescue. You learn to walk through the fire. Machiavelli would not tell you to control the river. He would tell you to become the kind of person who studies its movements, who learns to build on higher ground, who knows when to leap and when to brace. Because fate may be wild, but you are not powerless. And power, in the end, is not about conquering chaos. It's about becoming the one who doesn't panic when it arrives. To manipulate is to be human. To do it consciously, responsibly, and without cruelty, that is something else entirely. The word manipulation drips with moral panic. We associate it with narcissists, liars, predators. But what if we stripped the word of its shadows and called it what it really is? Influence, shaped with intent. Persuasion, carried by precision. framing, timing, silence, and presence used with care. Machiavelli never advocated for cruelty as a default. He advocated for clarity, and clarity tells us this: if you don't shape perception, someone else will. If you don't understand influence, you will be controlled by those who do. The question is not whether manipulation exists, it's whether you will use it consciously or be used unconsciously by others who do it better. This is where ethical manipulation begins. To influence ethically is not to deceive. It is to frame reality in a way that acknowledges the mind's vulnerability to suggestion and respects it. It is the recognition that humans are not logical machines. We are emotional, impulsive, and reactive. We respond not to raw truth, but to how truth is wrapped. Ethical manipulation asks, how can I express what's real in a way that moves, without misleading? How can I use rhythm, tone, and timing not to distort, but to deliver? How can I guide perception without violating trust? Machiavelli understood that influence doesn't come from yelling louder. It comes from knowing your terrain, who you're speaking to, what they fear, what they want, what they believe they deserve. Real influence meets people in their narrative and gently reroutes it. And this is where power becomes psychological. You don't always need to win by force. Sometimes, a well-placed question dismantles an entire wall of resistance. Sometimes, mirroring a tone opens a door that logic could never touch. Sometimes the most strategic thing you can do is to say nothing. The silence that follows your words often speaks louder than the words themselves. In a world where attention is currency, subtlety becomes an act of defiance. You don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to understand when to speak and why. The ethical strategist doesn't aim to control others. They aim to reduce unnecessary friction, to align communication with timing, to make themselves clear without making others defensive. They understand that every sentence carries weight, not just in content, but in delivery. And they use that awareness not to dominate, but to dance. Yes, manipulation can be malicious, but it can also be protective. Think of the friend who distracts someone from a panic attack by changing the subject. The teacher who redirects a student's ego to unlock their curiosity. The leader who reframes failure as feedback. These are not deceptions. They are crafted truths, built to help others see what they are not yet ready to confront directly. To manipulate with care is to see the game without becoming its villain. But this requires restraint. Power without conscience curdles into control. Strategy without ethics dissolves into exploitation. Machiavelli's brilliance was not in showing us how to become predators. It was in showing us how predators think, so we don't mistake kindness for immunity. You can be kind. You can be real. You can be good. But if you want to survive in a world where people weaponize language, emotion, and vulnerability, then you must learn the mechanics of influence, or you will always be dancing to music someone else composed. To understand emotional leverage is not to abandon integrity, it is to protect it in a world that eats sincerity for sport. Ask yourself, can you frame your truth without shrinking it? Can you speak with force without domination? Can you move hearts without faking yours? These are the marks of a modern prince. Not a ruler of people, but a master of presence. Someone who does not shout to be heard, but shapes silence to be felt. Someone who understands that influence is not granted. It is sculpted, carefully, in the space between intent and delivery. So no, you don't need to become a manipulator in the dark, destructive sense. But you do need to become conscious of the levers, because they are already being pulled. And the only question is whether your hands are on them, or someone else's. In Machiavelli's world, the prince was the ruler of a state, a figure of cunning, strength, and strategic intelligence. But what happens when the kingdoms disappear? When power no longer wears a crown, but hides in code, corporations, and curated personas? We no longer live under monarchs. We live under markets, under narratives, under invisible systems that shape what we see, feel, desire, and become. And in this new order, the modern prince is not a sovereign of others, but a sovereign of self. You are the territory now, your mind, your voice, your presence, and every day it's under siege, from propaganda, from pressure, from algorithms designed to keep you docile, distracted, and dependent. To become the modern prince is not to rule others. It is to reclaim the right to rule yourself. But what does that look like? It begins with lucidity, the kind of ruthless clarity Machiavelli demanded of those who sought to survive corrupt systems. You must see the world as it is, not as you wish it were. You must study it like a strategist. Observe who holds the power, who shapes perception, who decides the language of legitimacy. Then, with this awareness, you must ask, what game am I being asked to play? And do I accept the rules? Most don't. Most obey without reflection. They trade their inner sovereignty for comfort, for applause, for the illusion of belonging. But the modern prince does not beg for validation. He builds an internal architecture that cannot be bought, bullied, or seduced. This is not arrogance, it's discipline. A quiet resistance to the systems that would rather you be reactive than reflective. Machiavelli understood that power was not just structural, it was psychological. The one who controls your perception controls your behavior. And in the 21st century, the war for perception has gone digital. Every scroll, every headline, every frame is a test. Will you think for yourself or be thought for? The modern prince cultivates a different rhythm. They do not react to every crisis. They do not perform for the crowd. They speak with intention, observe with patience, act with precision. Their power is not in domination, but in direction. Not in conquest, but in clarity. This is the evolution of Virtù, from military force to mental focus. You don't need to overthrow kingdoms. You need to reclaim your time, your attention, your sense of meaning. You need to know when to be seen and when to disappear, when to speak, and when silence is the sharpest blade. The modern prince knows how to adapt without shape-shifting, how to remain grounded without becoming rigid, how to play the long game in a world addicted to speed. And most importantly, the modern prince knows how to suffer without breaking. Because every system, no matter how loud or seductive, will eventually turn. Empires fall, platforms decay, fame fades. But the individual who is rooted in purpose, in strategy, in a vision beyond visibility, that individual does not crumble. He pivots. So, who are you beneath the noise? What are your principles when no one is watching? What is your direction when there is no applause to steer you? Can you hold your center in the middle of the storm? These are the real questions of sovereignty. Not how do I win, but what am I unwilling to lose? To become the modern prince is to walk with awareness, to act with intention, to lead not by force but by example, to see through illusion without becoming disillusioned, to recognize that power without self-knowledge is always borrowed and always taken back. Machiavelli didn't promise you safety. He promised you insight. He handed you a map, covered in blood and wisdom, and said, "This is the terrain. Now, how will you walk it?" And that question, 5 centuries later, is still yours to answer. Machiavelli has been demonized for centuries, not because he was evil, but because he told the truth. And truth, when stripped of its sentimental dressing, makes people deeply uncomfortable. He wrote not to corrupt you, but to sharpen you. He did not whisper from a throne, he spoke from exile. from the margins, from the cold reality that those who see clearly are often cast out by those who live in comforting illusions. But clarity is a gift, and if used well, it becomes your shield. Not to hurt others, but to stop being hurt by those who play the game while pretending it doesn't exist. Machiavelli's insights survive because the world hasn't changed as much as we'd like to believe. Power still wears masks. Systems still reward appearance over depth. And those who wait for fairness are often consumed by those who move strategically. But the point is not to become ruthless. It is to stop being blind, to live with your eyes open, to lead your own life with the same sharpness that once ruled city-states. Because sovereignty doesn't require a throne, it requires attention, discipline, and self-mastery. If you've listened this far, then maybe you feel it too. The quiet tension between the world as it is and the world you wish it were. Tell me in the comments. What truth have you had to swallow to survive? What mask have you chosen to wear? Not out of deceit, but out of necessity. I want to hear how you navigate the gap between illusion and clarity. Machiavelli lived in that aforementioned tension, and he built a language for those brave enough to stay there, eyes open, spine straight, heart intact. So take his words, not as commands but as lenses, not as poison but as armor. Don't become cynical, become conscious. Don't mimic the tyrant, become the sovereign. In the end, The Prince isn't a book about politics, it's a book about perception. And once you learn to see the world without its mask, the question is no longer, who will rule you? It becomes, will you dare to rule yourself? Thank you for walking this path with me tonight. Until next time, may you wear no mask but the one you choose, and may clarity be your quietest strength.